Scared me.
I scared you? Well, let me at least say the name.
Okay.
Okay. Veepstakes 2020, The Democrats, by Outsider Information. Who are you?
Somebody?
Somebody? You sound a lot younger than me. How old are you?
I'm 7.
You're 7?
I'm a kid. What do you expect?
Oh, well, I'm not a kid. I'm old.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are we doing?
You tell me.
Oh, that's right. Well, this is Veepstakes 2020, The Democrats. This video is about who Joe Biden might pick to be the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party in 2020.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's 2020. What's 2020?
This year.
That's this year.
Yeah.
A lot has already happened this year, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We've had the impeachment of the president. We've had COVID-19.
This crap.
Yeah, you don't like that, do you?
Who does?
And not very many people, no.
I like that I don't have to go to school, but besides that,
Yeah?
nothing.
Oh, okay. And we've had the Black Lives Matter protests. But we've got a lot more that's going to happen in the second half of the year. What's that?
That's,
You know what that is?
White House?
No, that's the Capitol.
Oh.
Because we're going to have elections for Congress.
Oh.
But you know what this is, right? What's that?
That's the White House.
And who lives there?
The president.
And what's going to happen this November?
New president. Yay.
Yeah, because we're going to have an election for president. I already know that Donald Trump will be a candidate.
Who I don't really like him.
You don't like Donald Trump? Oh.
Do you like Donald Trump?
Well, I don't have an opinion. Because, see, I'm a political scientist.
What?
Yeah.
You just said you were.
Though I can say that I'm a political scientist.
What?
But,
Outsider.
see, yes, I'm a outsider information. Because I'm an outsider, you see. Because I'm not in the Beltway. I don't have any contacts in Washington. But I do know a lot about politics because that's my job.
What's your job?
My job is knowing about politics and government.
Okay, go on.
Okay. So Donald Trump is going to be a candidate for president. You know who that guy is? The guy standing next to him?
Mike Pence.
That's pretty good for a 7-year-old. He's the vice presidential candidate for the Republicans. And now the Democrats, they've picked Joe Biden to be the presidential candidate, but you know what they haven't done yet?
What?
They haven't picked anybody for vice president. And Joe Biden's going to have to do that. He's going to have to pick somebody to be the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party.
Hey, Joe Biden.
Yeah. So who's he going to pick?
Well, not my mom.
Not your mom? Well, no, not your mom.
You know what I mean. Okay, I don't know.
I don't
know anyone. I don't know anyone there is, really. Besides,
well, would you like to see some of the prospects, some of the people who might be picked?
Why, yes.
Okay. Well, Joe Biden has already said he's going to pick a woman for vice president. So imagine you have a long list of all the people who he might pick for vice president. He's already cut it in half because he said, no men this time, we're going to pick a woman. So there's a lot of people who get considered for vice president anytime you have an opening, like now.
Pretending I know what's going on.
So, governors, you know what a governor is?
Leader
Of
the state.
You were really smart for a 7-year-old. There's senators, there's cabinet secretaries, there's members of the House of Representatives, at least some of them. There are some mayors, there's business leaders, and sometimes some diplomats. There's a lot of people who get considered. If we just look at governors and senators and all those people we just looked at, just the women, you've got already 50 or so people who might be Joe Biden's running mate. But you can narrow down the list. You know how?
How?
How? Well, I'll show you.
I'm gonna go play now.
What?
I'm gonna go play now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll see you later.
Bye.
Welcome back. While my co-host attends to other business, let's pick up where we left off. Let's look at the strategies Joe Biden is likely to use to narrow the field. Traditionally, presidential candidates have used two strategies for picking a vice presidential running mate. There's what's called balancing the ticket, and there's reinforcing the ticket. So let's look at these. Balancing the ticket means that you pick a running mate who compensates for your perceived weaknesses. Now, oftentimes, these weaknesses don't mean personal weaknesses. They mean weaknesses of the ticket itself. So if you have a presidential candidate who's from the North, you might want a running mate who's from the South. Or if you have a presidential candidate who's on the conservative end of the party, you may want a more liberal vice presidential running mate. You're balancing the characteristics of the presidential ticket. Sometimes, and especially in the last few decades, you're balancing not just for characteristics of the political party, but you're balancing for characteristics of the individual candidate. When Barack Obama won the Democratic nomination in 2008, he had done well in the primaries with educated voters, but had done less well with high school educated working class white voters. He had a few years experience in the Senate, but not very much foreign policy experience. So you've got a young black presidential candidate. He picked an older white vice presidential candidate, Joe Biden. And also he picked a candidate who had a lot of foreign policy experience. George W. Bush did the same thing. He didn't have very much foreign policy experience as governor of Texas. He picked Dick Cheney, who had been Secretary of Defense. John McCain in 2008, older candidate, picks a younger woman as vice president, Sarah Palin. Sometimes, though, rather than balancing the ticket, you choose to reinforce the ticket. That means you have some characteristic as a presidential candidate that you think is particularly appealing to the voters, and you want to double down on that. You want to give the voters twice as much of that. So in 1992, the Democrats picked Bill Clinton, a young, moderate Southerner. Who does he pick for vice president? Al Gore, also perceived to be a young, moderate Southerner. But in picking Al Gore, even though he was reinforcing those characteristics, being a younger, more moderate Southern candidate, he was also balancing the ticket. Bill Clinton was a governor, no foreign policy experience. Al Gore, a senator who had a reputation for foreign policy expertise. Sometimes you can balance and reinforce at the same time. This is what John McCain thought he was doing with Sarah Palin. Yes, he was balancing for age. He was balancing for ideology because John McCain was perceived to be on the more moderate end of the Republican Party and Sarah Palin was on the more conservative end. But from John McCain's point of view, he thought he was reinforcing the ticket when it came to a particularly attractive feature, and that was being a maverick. You may remember John McCain. He had the reputation for sort of bucking the party, for not going along with the party line on everything. He was a maverick. Well, Sarah Palin had the same reputation as governor of Alaska. And so sometimes you can balance the ticket and reinforce the ticket at the same time. What will Joe Biden's strategy be? Will he balance or reinforce? Well, likely he's going to do both. On the one hand, Biden may want to balance for gender and age, and also balance for progressive ideology and identity things like race and ethnicity. On the other hand, Biden is likely to want to reinforce the ticket when it comes to experience in government and appeal to the working class. So let's look at these. We can be certain that Biden will balance for gender and age. He's already announced that he will pick a woman for vice president. And with the single exception of Elizabeth Warren, we can surmise that that woman will be significantly younger than he is. At 77, Biden needs a running mate who can reassure voters that, should his health falter, a vital, healthy VP will be there to step in. Balancing for age can be tricky, though. John McCain discovered this when he selected Sarah Palin in 2008. Setting aside any political opinions about Sarah Palin, she did balance for age very well. She was 28 years younger than McCain. But that became a problem in itself. When a 44-year-old Sarah Palin stood next to a 72-year-old John McCain, he looked even older. So there can be a fine line between picking a running mate who allays concerns about your age and picking a running mate who exacerbates those same concerns. Joe Biden will likely be looking for a woman between about 40 and 60 years old. Democrats have plenty of prospects here, including these women all in their 40s or early 50s. The trade-off is often between age and experience, something else Joe Biden will be looking for. But there's an intersection of the two that can work. Tammy Duckworth and Kamala Harris are good examples. Duckworth in particular has probably the most impressive biography of anyone in the running, and she's only 52. More on her a little bit later. Joe Biden will also have a great deal of pressure to balance for two other factors: ideology and race and ethnicity. Biden represents the same moderate, cautious wing of the party that Hillary Clinton did in 2016. This means that the left wing of the party, led by Bernie Sanders in 2016 and by both Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in 2020, have lost out on the nomination twice in a row, and they're starting to get restless. Defections of Sanders voters from Clinton, whether helped by Russian propaganda or not, may well have cost Clinton the 2016 election. Biden knows he must appease these voters if he wants them to show up for him on Election Day. Some progressive Democrats have threatened a similar boycott this year if Warren or another progressive is not selected. The other factor that Biden must balance is race and ethnicity. Biden's career and his own ascension to the vice presidency in 2008 was largely built on his ability to attract white working-class voters. Barack Obama did poorly with that demographic in the 2008 primaries and balanced the ticket by picking Biden. Ironically, Biden owes his success in the 2020 Democratic primaries to the support of African American voters. The vice presidency may be where he rewards that loyalty, balancing a white presidential candidate with a black VP. This would also provide a poetic symmetry to his own selection by Obama 12 years ago. But Biden may also decide to emulate Obama's pick by balancing for a demographic where he was weak. The lesson Biden may take from the 2020 primaries is that he himself is the candidate who can attract black voters, and instead he needs to balance for the demographic in the party where he showed a notable weakness, with Hispanic voters. But therein lies the rub. If he picks a black running mate, he risks alienating Hispanics and vice versa. And if he picks a moderate of any race or ethnicity, he could alienate progressives. I suspect this may be where Biden reframes the balance. Rather than balancing for ideology or race, he may balance for ideology through race, picking a VP from a minority group who may not be as far to the left as progressives might want, but trusting that a minority candidate will be attractive to the left, who might not want to criticize a minority choice for not being sufficiently progressive because she is a minority candidate. So Biden may combine ideology and race and ethnicity by balancing for identity, essentially a kind of political triangulation between the two. Biden has some interesting options here. He could pick one of the more moderate black prospects, like Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms or Senator Kamala Harris. Or he could select a Latina, like Lujan Grisham, the governor of New Mexico. An interesting selection here could also be former Xerox CEO Ursula Burns, who also served as the chair of the President's Export Council in the Obama administration. Burns is the daughter of black immigrants from Panama. She identifies as black, but her Latin American ties could prove beneficial to Biden's ticket. As a wealthy businesswoman from the 1%, she may not be what the left is looking for, but as a black woman of Panamanian heritage who rose from poverty to live the American dream, she could be a unifying choice. Tammy Duckworth is of white and Thai Chinese descent. Tammy Baldwin is the first openly gay woman to serve in the U.S. Senate and has a strongly progressive voting record. Both women would represent an out-of-the-box approach to balancing the ticket for identity. Joe Biden is also likely to want to reinforce the ticket for those characteristics that he thinks will be most attractive to voters. First, there's experience. One of the Biden campaign's likely themes is that President Trump has made a mess of governing, and it's time for a more experienced person to take the helm and stabilize the country. If that's going to be his message, then Biden is likely to want a VP who reinforces the theme of level-headed experience and competence. Of course, for most of the last 50 years, Americans have voted for outsiders. Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. And Donald Trump is the ultimate expression of this. Biden may be betting that times have changed and government experience has become a selling point. So he may be looking for senators or governors, but perhaps a senator or governor or even a congresswoman who also has some other less traditional lines in her resume that shakes things up a bit. Military experience, business experience, something different. Here again, it's a fine line. Biden may be betting that Americans will vote for competence, but they still don't like politicians. Each of these women has had a career that might fit the bill. Cheri Bustos is a 4-term congresswoman from northwestern Illinois and the only member of the Illinois House delegation who's not from metropolitan Chicago. She's become something of a Trump whisperer in the Democratic caucus, explaining Trump voters to confused colleagues who don't understand why the Democratic Party is no longer seen as the party of the working class to many white working class voters. Tammy Duckworth is a U.S. Senator, also from Illinois. She's served in the House of Representatives, as Illinois Director of Veterans Affairs, and as Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C., and as an Army combat pilot in Iraq, where she lost both legs during a rocket-propelled grenade attack in 2004. Kamala Harris is a senator from California, who also served as California's Attorney General, San Francisco's District Attorney, and was a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. Lujan Grisham is the governor of New Mexico. She served 6 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, and before that, 16 years as New Mexico's Director of Aging, dealing with the elderly community, and as Secretary of Health. That experience in particular may benefit her given the COVID pandemic that we're experiencing currently. Hilda Solis is currently a member of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, which is the county commission for LA County. But before that, she served 8 years in the California State Legislature, then 8 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, and then 4 years as Secretary of Labor in the Obama administration. Having gone from state to national office, then back to local office, could make her an interesting pick. Serving in the Los Angeles County government counts as local office, but not a very traditional one. With a population over 10 million people, LA County is larger than all but about 9 or 10 of the 50 states. And finally, there's Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts who ran for president this year. One of the reasons we're not talking about who her running mate will be is because she didn't do a great job explaining how her experience qualified her for president. She actually did a really good job doing that in her stump speeches. but she never really included it in her media advertising. She started out in fairly modest circumstances in Oklahoma and rose to become a law professor at Harvard, specializing in understanding family debt and how bankruptcy was not caused by bad decisions so much as bad luck, specifically caused by, in many cases, healthcare problems that bankrupted families. All of this could make her very attractive to struggling families today, but she didn't clearly convey that when she ran for president. If people think of her as Elizabeth Warren, elite law professor, rather than Elizabeth Warren, small-town Oklahoma girl made good, then she's not going to go very far. And she didn't in the presidential campaign. If Joe Biden thinks he can remake her image to emphasize this experience that she's had, then she could be an attractive candidate. As we talked about earlier, Joe Biden has the reputation of a politician who connects well to the white working class. More broadly, understanding regular, hard-working Main Street America is likely to be a theme of the Biden campaign. He's the candidate of the working class, of any race or ethnicity. This connection to regular folks is something Biden is going to want to reinforce with his VP pick. So what does it mean to be a candidate who connects with the working class? It means empathy, especially about hard times. With many people suffering from the health and economic disaster of the COVID pandemic, Joe Biden is perfectly situated to become the country's comforter-in-chief, a vital role that presidents must play and one that Donald Trump is particularly uncomfortable with. But Biden is built for this role. His first wife and daughter were tragically killed in a car crash in 1972. His oldest son, Beau, died of brain cancer in 2015. Empathy is something Biden is genuinely, authentically good at. He needs a VP with similar skills. Connecting with the working class also means having an understanding, or at least a recollection, of what life is like for people who are not political or economic elites. When Hillary Clinton vowed to put the coal industry out of business during the 2016 campaign, it was clear in her mind that she was talking about pollution and global warming, not about throwing coal miners out of their jobs. But that wasn't clear to the miners themselves. Joe Biden's VP pick can't have that kind of tin ear when it comes to working people. Many of the polls that have been taken through June and July of this year show Biden doing well with minority working class voters, but still trailing President Trump among white working class voters. So if Biden selects a white woman for VP, reinforcing for class may also have an element of balancing as well. Let's look at Biden's top prospects when it comes to reinforcing for class. Tammy Baldwin may be of particular interest to Biden in this regard. As a gay progressive senator, she checks the identity politics boxes that we discussed earlier. But she has also proven popular in working-class Wisconsin and has demonstrated the kind of common touch Biden is looking for. As I also mentioned earlier, Cheri Bustos has built a career on understanding regular folks. In fact, if Biden decides that his VP's #1 job will be to narrow Trump's margin with white working-class voters, Bustos is probably the best woman for the job. Congresswoman Linda Sanchez of California, Congresswoman Terry Sewell of Alabama, and former Labor Secretary Hilda Solis of California could each be considered if Biden wants to emphasize his loyalty to black or Hispanic working-class voters. Sanchez was a labor lawyer before running for office and held union positions in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Sewell is the daughter of middle-class educators from Selma, Alabama. Her mother was the first black woman on the Selma City Council and remains a trustee of Brown Chapel AME Church, home base of the marchers who tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965. Hilda Solis besides the credentials I discussed earlier, is the daughter of Hispanic immigrants, and both her parents were active in unions. Her father was a teamster, her mother a member of the United Rubber Workers. Her story of rising from modest means to become Secretary of Labor could fit well here. And I talked about Elizabeth Warren previously, and how her class politics could work well if she can change the image she's already built for herself. Using balancing and reinforcing, as we've just discussed, I think we can narrow the field to these 14 women. But before we look at them, let's look at 4 prominent candidates who didn't make the list.